The arrow was already nocked and half drawn when Kade Finnegan saw the eyes. Through the morning mist that clung to the ravine like cobwebs, he had tracked what he believed to be one of the massive direwolves that had been terrorizing the frontier settlements for weeks. The prints were large, the stride heavy, and when he finally caught sight of the hulking figure moving between the trees, every instinct screamed predator. His fingers tightened on the bowstring, his breathing steadied, and he prepared to loose the shot that would end the threat and earn him the substantial bounty the village council had posted. But then she turned. Those eyes were not the yellow gleam of a beast. They were amber, warm and startling human in their depth of emotion, set in a face that was undeniably feminine despite the green skin and small tusks that curved from her lower jaw. She was not hunting. She was gathering, her large hands carefully plucking mushrooms from the base of a fallen log and placing them in a woven basket with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone of her size. Kade froze, the arrow still drawn but his aim wavering. An orc woman. Here, in the deep woods, alone and seemingly at peace with the forest around her. She wore simple clothing, a tunic and trousers patched and mended in several places, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid. She hummed something as she worked, a melody that carried through the quiet morning with unexpected sweetness. His arms began to tremble from holding the draw. He should release the tension, lower the bow, but movement might alert her. Orcs were dangerous. Everyone knew that. The stories from the border wars were still fresh enough that men who had fought in them still bore the scars. His own father had died in a skirmish with an orc raiding party when Kade was barely 10 years old. Yet this woman was picking mushrooms and humming. The logical part of his mind, the part trained by years of hunting and tracking, noted that she showed no signs of aggression. Her posture was relaxed. Her movements were careful and deliberate, the actions of someone who knew the forest and respected it. She was not scouting for a war party. She was not lying in ambush. She was simply existing in this quiet space, as he had done countless times in his own hunts. Slowly, carefully, Kade eased the tension on the bowstring and lowered his weapon. The slight creak of the wood made her head snap up, and suddenly, those amber eyes were fixed directly on him. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. He could see the fear flash across her face, quickly replaced by something harder, more resigned. She straightened to her full height, which was considerable, easily matching his own 6 feet and likely surpassing it by an inch or two. Her shoulders squared as if preparing for an attack. "I mean no harm," Kade said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. His heart was hammering against his ribs. She said nothing, but her gaze flicked to the bow in his hands, then back to his face. Her expression was unreadable, a careful mask that gave away nothing. The basket of mushrooms dangled from one hand, forgotten. "I thought you were a direwolf," he continued, feeling foolish even as he said it. "The tracks, the size. I am hunting the pack that has been killing livestock." Still silence. But she had not run and she had not attacked. Those were both choices she could have made. Instead, she simply watched him with those impossibly expressive eyes, waiting. Kade slowly, deliberately, returned his arrow to the quiver at his hip and slung his bow across his back. The gesture of peace felt enormous, leaving him vulnerable in a way that made his palms sweat. "I will not harm you," he repeated. For several long moments she continued to stare. Then, in a voice deeper than he expected but clear and articulate, she spoke. "Your kind usually does not wait to ask questions before loosing arrows." The bitterness in those words was earned, Kade knew. The frontier was not kind to orcs. Most were shot on sight, considered too dangerous to parley with, too monstrous to deserve mercy. He had done it himself, twice in defense of homesteads under attack, but those had been warriors, armed and aggressive. This woman was a gatherer, no weapon visible except perhaps a small knife at her belt for cutting plants. "I am not most men," he said, then immediately felt pretentious. He cleared his throat. "What I mean is, I try to see what I am shooting before I kill it. Usually." Something that might have been amusement flickered across her face, gone too quickly to be certain. "Usually," she echoed. "How fortunate for me that you hesitated this once. What is your name?" The question surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. Her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time her careful composure cracked just a little. "Why would you want to know my name?" "Because you are a person, not a beast," Kade replied. "And because you are on my conscience now. If I had killed you, I would have wanted to know who you were." She studied him for a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable sensation of being weighed and measured, every aspect of his character examined in that penetrating gaze. Finally, she shifted the basket to her other hand. "Grukara," she said simply, "though I doubt you can pronounce it properly." "Grukara," he repeated, doing his best with the unfamiliar sounds. It came out rougher than her pronunciation, but close enough that she did not correct him. "And you, Hunter?" "Kade Finnegan." "Kade Finnegan," she said, testing his name on her tongue just as he had tested hers. "You should leave these woods. The direwolves you seek den further north, near the limestone caves. They will not come this far south while the streams still run with snowmelt." It was good information, the kind that could save him days of fruitless tracking. "How do you know this?" "Because I watch and I listen, and the forest tells me things." She adjusted her grip on the basket. "And because I have lived here far longer than you have been hunting it. You live here, in the woods." Something shuddered behind her eyes, the brief openness vanishing behind that careful mask again. "Somewhere you will not find me, Kade Finnegan, and somewhere I hope you will not look." With that, she turned and began walking away, her stride long and surprisingly quiet for someone of her size. Kade watched her go, his mind churning with questions and contradictions. Everything he had been taught about orcs said they were violent, savage, barely intelligent beings driven by bloodlust and conquest. Yet Grukara spoke with eloquence, moved with grace, and had helped him rather than fighting or fleeing. "Wait," he called before he could stop himself. She paused but did not turn around, her posture wary. "Thank you for the information about the wolves." For a moment he thought she would not respond. Then, without looking back, she said, "Do not mistake this for friendship, human. I helped you so you would not wander closer to my home. Nothing more." Then she was gone, melting into the forest shadows like smoke, leaving Kade standing alone in the ravine with his bow and his confusion, and the strange, persistent image of amber eyes that had looked at him with more humanity than half the people in his village. The village of Millbrook sat at the edge of the frontier, a collection of wooden buildings huddled around a central square like children gathering for warmth. Kade had lived here all his life, first as the son of a farmer, then as an apprentice to old Thomas the hunter after his father died, and finally as a hunter in his own right. He knew every family, every building, every path through the surrounding woods. It was home for better or worse. When he returned 2 days later with a young direwolf he had tracked and killed near the limestone caves exactly where Grukara had said, the village received him with the usual mix of gratitude and expectation. The butcher took the carcass to process. The tanner claimed the hide, and the village council paid him half the bounty with promises of the rest when the entire pack was eliminated. "Fine work, Kade," said Councilman Morris, a portly man who had never ventured more than a mile from the village in his entire life. "The people can sleep easier knowing you are watching over us." Kade accepted the praise with a nod, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about Amber Eyes, and the way Grukara had moved through the forest as if she belonged there more than he did. He kept thinking about the bitterness in her voice when she spoke of humans shooting first and asking questions never. He kept thinking about the fact that she lived somewhere in those woods, alone and hidden, and what that loneliness must cost her. "You seem distracted," observed Helena, the blacksmith's daughter, as she handed him a mug of cider at the tavern that evening. She was a pretty girl with dark hair and a quick smile, and half the young men in the village were courting her. Kade had taken her to the harvest festival last year, and they had danced and laughed and kissed once under the stars. It had been pleasant but not earth-shattering, and they had drifted back to friendship without much drama. "Just tired," Kade said, which was not entirely a lie. "Tracking wolves was exhausting work." "My father says there are rumors of orc movements to the west," Helena said, lowering her voice. "Some of the border scouts reported seeing campfires in the hills. People are nervous." Kade took a long drink of his cider to avoid having to respond immediately. Orc movements always made people nervous. Sometimes it was justified. A war party on the move or a clan displaced by conflict looking to carve out new territory. Sometimes it was nothing, just scouts or hunters going about their business as humans did. The problem was that no one ever bothered to find out which before grabbing weapons and forming militias. "I have not seen signs of any war parties," he said finally. "Just the usual tracks. Hunters, maybe a small family group passing through." Helena frowned. "You should tell the council. They need to know." "I will mention it," Kade lied. He had no intention of reporting what he knew, which was almost nothing, and certainly no intention of mentioning Grukara. The thought of a mob from Millbrook hunting her through the woods made his stomach turn. That night, alone in his small cabin at the edge of the village, Kade lay awake and stared at the ceiling beams. He tried to tell himself that his reluctance to report what he had seen was just good sense. Grukara posed no threat. She was one woman living peacefully in the forest, gathering mushrooms and watching wolves. There was no reason to bring the wrath of the village down on her head, but deeper than that practical reasoning was something else, something he did not quite want to examine. The memory of her eyes. The grace of her movements. The intelligence in her words. She had treated him with more honesty in 5 minutes than some people he had known his entire life. She had helped him when she could have simply vanished into the trees and left him to waste days searching in the wrong place. She had called him by his name, and for some reason that felt significant. 3 weeks passed before Kade saw her again. He spent those weeks hunting the remainder of the direwolf pack, tracking them through the northern reaches of the forest and slowly, methodically eliminating the threat. It was dangerous work that required all his focus, leaving little time to think about green-skinned women with amber eyes who haunted his dreams with increasing frequency. But once the pack was dealt with and the full bounty collected, Kade found his feet carrying him back toward the ravine where they had first met. He told himself he was just surveying the area, checking for signs of new predators or tracking patterns. He told himself there was nothing unusual about covering this particular stretch of forest. He told himself he was not looking for her. He was lying. It took 2 days of careful searching before he found her again, this time near a creek that tumbled down from the high country in a series of small waterfalls. She was washing clothes, kneeling on the smooth stones at the water's edge and scrubbing fabric with focused attention. She had her sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle, and her hair was loose, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. Kade announced his presence before approaching, having learned from enough hunting accidents that surprising anyone, human or orc, was a good way to get hurt. Grukara. She looked up, and if she was surprised to see him, she hid it well. Kade Finnegan, did you find your wolves? I did. Right where you said they would be. Good. She returned her attention to the laundry, scrubbing at a stain with determined strokes. Then you have no more reason to be in these woods. I have every reason, Kade said, moving closer. I am a hunter. These are my hunting grounds. Then hunt somewhere else. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Grukara's hand stilled on the fabric, and for a long moment she did not move. Then, slowly, she looked up at him again, and there was something raw in her expression, something vulnerable that she could not quite hide. Because I do not want to be found, she said quietly. Because I have built a life here, small and lonely as it is, and I do not want it destroyed. Because every time a human learns where I am, I have to move, and I am tired of moving. I am tired of running. I am tired of being afraid. The words hit Kade harder than he expected, carrying the weight of years of persecution and fear. How many times had she been driven from a home? How many places had she tried to settle before finding this isolated stretch of forest? How many times had she faced humans with bows and swords and hatred in their eyes? I will not tell anyone, he heard himself say. I promise. Grukara laughed, but it was a bitter sound with no humor in it. Promises from humans are worth less than dirt, Kade Finnegan. I have heard them before. Then judge me by my actions, not by what others have done. He lowered himself to sit on a nearby boulder, making himself less threatening by taking a position below her. I could have killed you when we first met. I did not. I could have tracked you to your home and reported your location to the village. I did not. I could have brought a militia into these woods to hunt you down. I did not. What will it take for you to believe that I mean you no harm? She studied him for a long time, her hands still and dripping water, her amber eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. Finally, she returned to scrubbing the clothes, but her movements were less aggressive, more thoughtful. Why? She asked. Why do you care what happens to me? I am nothing to you, just another orc, another monster that your people would be happy to see dead. You are not a monster. The words came easily, naturally, because they were true. You are a person who was gathering mushrooms and washing clothes and living peacefully in the forest. The only monster I see is the prejudice that forces you to hide. Grukara's hand stilled again. She stared down at the water, at her reflection distorted by the current, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. You are either very foolish or very kind, Kade Finnegan. I have not decided which. Can I not be both? That surprised a laugh from her, a real one this time, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through clouds. It transformed her face, softening the hard edges and revealing the beauty underneath. Kade felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the mild spring weather. Perhaps you can, she admitted. She wrung out the garment she had been washing and draped it over a nearby bush to dry. What do you want from me, human? Just to talk, Kade said honestly. I spend most of my time alone in the woods. It would be nice to have someone to talk to who understands them as I do. I am not your friend, I know. I do not trust you, I know that too, and I will vanish the moment I think you are a threat. I would expect nothing less. Grukara shook her head, but there was something almost like amusement in her expression. You are strange, Kade Finnegan, very strange indeed. They talked as she finished her washing, a careful conversation that skirted around anything too personal or revealing. Kade told her about the direwolf hunt, leaving out the parts about the village bounty and the council meetings. Grukara told him about the signs of spring in the forest, the early flowers and returning birds, the way the elk were moving back up into the high country. It was comfortable in a way that surprised him, as if they had been doing this for years instead of minutes. When she finished and gathered her damp laundry into a basket, Grukara looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You may come back," she said, the words seeming to cost her something, "if you wish. But if I find any sign that you have been followed or that you have told anyone where to find me, I will disappear and you will never see me again. Do you understand?" "I understand." She nodded once, then turned and walked away, carrying her basket of washing into the forest. Kade watched her go, that strange warmth still glowing in his chest, and realized that he was already planning when he could return. Spring deepened into early summer, and Kade found himself spending more and more time in the deep woods. He told the village he was ranging far afield, checking for signs of new threats or tracking game populations. It was not entirely a lie. He did those things. But mostly, he was seeking out Grukara. Their meetings became a rhythm, irregular but recurring. Sometimes he would find her gathering plants, her knowledge of herbs and roots far surpassing his own. She taught him which mushrooms were safe to eat and which would kill a man in hours, which bark could be brewed for fever, and which leaves could be crushed to stop bleeding. Other times, he would come upon her fishing in one of the clear pools that dotted the creek, her patience infinite as she waited for the trout to venture close enough to her quick hands. Once, memorably, he found her carving wood by a small fire, her large hands wielding the knife with surprising delicacy as she shaped a piece of oak into the rough form of a bird. He had watched, fascinated, as the sculpture took shape under her skilled fingers, and when she finished, she had offered it to him with a shrug that pretended not to care about his reaction. The little bird sat on the shelf in his cabin now, a secret treasure he could tell no one about. They talked about everything and nothing. Grukara spoke of the orc clans to the west, the complex politics and territorial disputes that humans never bothered to understand. She spoke of her childhood in a clan that valued strength above all else, of being different and softer than the warriors around her, of choosing exile over trying to fit a mold she was never meant for. She spoke of the years of wandering, of the hostility she faced in every human settlement, of the loneliness that had become her constant companion. Kade, in turn, told her about Millbrook, about growing up without a father and learning to hunt from old Thomas. He told her about the expectations that came with being one of the village's primary hunters, the weight of keeping people safe and fed. He told her about the narrow worldview of the frontier, where anything different was dangerous, and anything dangerous had to be destroyed. He told her, haltingly, about his doubts, about the moments when he wondered if the stories he had been raised on were really true. "They are true," Grukara said one evening as they sat by the creek watching the sun set through the trees. "Some of them, at least. Orcs can be brutal and violent. We are stronger than humans, and some of us use that strength to take what we want. The stories of raids and battles, those happened. The fear your people have, it is not baseless. But it is not the whole truth either," Kade said. "No." She picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in her hands, examining the patterns in the rock. "But try explaining nuance to someone who just watched their farm burn. Try talking about peaceful orcs to a mother whose child was killed in a raid. Fear and hatred are simple. Understanding is hard. So we are all just trapped by history, doomed to keep fighting because our parents and grandparents fought." Grukara was quiet for a long moment, then she threw the stone into the creek with more force than necessary. It hit the water with a loud splash that startled a heron from its perch downstream. "I do not know," she said finally. "I used to think that maybe, someday, there could be peace, that if enough people on both sides chose to lay down their weapons, we could find a way to coexist. But I have been driven away too many times, hunted too many times to believe that anymore. The best I can hope for is to be left alone." The sadness in her voice made Kade's chest ache. Without thinking, he reached over and covered her hand with his own, a gesture of comfort that felt natural despite the strangeness of it. Her skin was warm, slightly rougher than his own, and he could feel the strength in those long fingers even as they lay still beneath his touch. Grukara stared at their joined hands as if she had never seen such a thing before. She did not pull away, but Kade felt her tense. Every muscle in her body suddenly coiled tight. For a heartbeat, he thought he had crossed an unforgivable line, that she would flee or lash out or both. But then, slowly, deliberately, she turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his. They sat like that as the sun finished setting, and the first stars emerged in the darkening sky. Not speaking, barely breathing, bound together by this simple, profound connection that neither of them had words for. Kade felt his heart hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it, but he did not let go, and neither did she. Finally, as full darkness fell and the night creatures began their songs, Grukara gently withdrew her hand. "You should go," she said softly. "You should not be in these woods after dark. There are worse things than direwolves. Will I see you again?" Yes. The word was simple, but it carried a weight of promise that made Kade's breath catch. "Tomorrow, if you wish, I will be gathering blackroot in the eastern meadow. I will find you." She nodded, then stood and melted into the darkness with that uncanny grace of hers, leaving Kade sitting alone by the creek with his racing heart, and the ghost of her touch still warm on his skin. The summer days grew long and golden, and Kade found himself living two separate lives. There was the life the village saw, the dutiful hunter who ranged through the forest and brought back game, who attended council meetings and accepted contracts for predator removal, who smiled and joked with Helena at the tavern and helped old Thomas repair his roof when the storms damaged it. It was a good life, a respected life, and it felt like a lie. Then there was the life no one saw, the hours spent with Grukara in the quiet places of the forest. They talked and walked and simply existed together, two people who should have been enemies finding unexpected friendship in the wilderness. Kade learned the rhythms of her days, the careful routines she had built to stay hidden and safe. He learned that she lived in a cave system deeper in the mountains, a network of chambers she had gradually turned into a home over several years. He learned that she was an incredible cook who could make a meal from roots and herbs that would have seemed inedible to him. He learned that she sang to herself when she thought no one could hear, old orc songs in a language he did not understand but found beautiful nonetheless. And he learned, though he tried not to acknowledge it, that he was falling in love with her. It was a slow recognition, creeping up on him through 1,000 small moments. The way she threw her head back when she laughed, unself-conscious and free. The way she listened when he talked, truly listened, with her full attention focused on him as if his words were the most important thing in the world. The way she moved, powerful and graceful all at once, completely at home in her own skin despite the world's rejection of her. The way she looked at him sometimes, with a softness in those amber eyes that made his heart do complicated things in his chest. He knew it was foolish. He knew it was dangerous. He knew it could lead nowhere but heartbreak. But knowing did not stop the feeling from growing, day by day, until it consumed him. Grukara, for her part, gave no clear sign of her own feelings. She was warm toward him, warmer than she was toward anything else in her life, but she maintained a careful distance, a line she would not let either of them cross. When their hands brushed as they walked, she would move away. When their eyes met and held for too long, she would look away first. She was protecting herself, he realized, or perhaps protecting both of them from something she knew would be impossible. "Tell me about your clan," Kade asked one afternoon as they sat in the shade of an ancient oak, sharing the rabbit he had caught and she had cooked. "Your family." Grukara's expression shuddered, that careful mask sliding into place. "Why?" "Because I want to know you, all of you, not just the parts you show me." She was silent for a long time, absently poking at the fire with a stick. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, as if she were pulling the words from some deep place inside herself. "My mother was a warrior, as was expected, strong, fierce, uncompromising. She could wield a blade as tall as I am and cut through enemies like wheat before a scythe. My father was a hunter, quieter but no less deadly. They were respected in the clan, honored for their strength and their skill. And you," a bitter smile twisted her lips. "I was a disappointment. Too soft, they said, too interested in plants and carving and singing. I could fight, I was taught like everyone else, but I had no love for it, no fire in my belly. My mother tried to beat it into me, literally. She thought if she made me hard enough, I would become the daughter she wanted. Instead, she just taught me that I did not belong." Kade's hands clenched into fists, anger rising hot and fast at the thought of anyone hurting her. "So you left, eventually. When I was old enough to survive on my own, I walked away. My mother did not try to stop me. I think she was relieved. One less embarrassment to the family name." Grukara's voice was level, but Kade could hear the pain underneath, old wounds that had never properly healed. "I have not seen them in 8 years. I do not know if they still live, and I tell myself I do not care. Mostly that is even true. I am sorry." She looked at him with surprise. "Why?" "You did not drive me out. Because you deserved better. You deserved a family that loved you for who you are, not who they wanted you to be." Something cracked in her expression, a fissure in that carefully maintained composure, and for a moment he saw the depth of loneliness behind it. Years of isolation and rejection that no amount of strength could fully armor against. Then she blinked and the mask returned, but not quite as firmly as before. "You are a strange man, Kade Finnegan," she said, echoing her words from their second meeting. But this time there was no mockery in it, only a sort of wondering confusion. "Why do you care so much?" "Because I love you," he thought but did not say. "Because you are the most fascinating, beautiful, remarkable person I have ever met. Because when I am with you, I feel more alive than I have in years. Because the thought of you alone and hurting makes my chest feel like it is being crushed in a vice." "Because you are my friend," he said instead, offering a truth that was smaller but safer. "And friends care about each other." Grukara stared at him, her amber eyes searching his face for something he could not name. Then slowly, tentatively, she smiled. It was not one of her usual quick flashes of amusement, but something deeper, something genuine that reached all the way to her eyes and transformed her entire face. "Yes," she said softly. "I suppose we are friends, are we not? How strange." "Very strange," Kade agreed, smiling back. And if his heart was breaking a little because she saw only friendship where he felt so much more, well, that was his burden to carry, not hers. The turning point came on a day that started like any other. Kade had finished his morning chores in the village and set out toward the eastern meadow where Grukara often foraged. The summer heat was oppressive, the kind of thick, humid air that promised storms by evening, and he was looking forward to the shade of the forest and the cool water of the creek. He found her sooner than expected, running through the trees with a speed that spoke of panic. Her hair was wild, her eyes wide with fear, and there was blood on her shoulder, a dark stain spreading across her tunic. When she saw him, she did not slow, grabbing his arm as she passed and pulling him with her. "Run," she gasped. "Hunters from the south. They tracked me, we need to run." Kade's blood turned to ice. How many? 4, maybe 5, armed and angry. They found my cave. They destroyed everything. Her voice cracked on the last word, grief and rage mixing with the fear. Run, Kade. If they find you with me, they will kill you too. But Kade did not run, not away. Instead, he pulled her toward a thick stand of brush he knew from his own hunting, a place where the undergrowth was dense enough to hide in if you knew how to move quietly. Grukara resisted for a moment, then followed his lead, trusting him despite her panic. They crouched in the shadows, pressed close together, barely breathing. Kade could feel her heart hammering against his shoulder, could smell the blood and fear sweat on her skin, could hear the harsh rasp of her breathing. He slowly, carefully, unslung his bow and nocked an arrow, positioning himself between her and the direction she had come from. The hunters crashed through the underbrush with all the subtlety of bears, shouting to each other as they came. Kade counted 4 of them, rough-looking men with the hard edges and casual violence of mercenaries. They carried swords and crossbows, and from their conversation, it was clear they had been tracking Grukara for days, ever since someone reported seeing a monster near a settlement to the south. Lost her, one of them growled, spitting on the ground. Damned orc is faster than she looks. Cannot have gone far, another replied. There was blood. We winged her good. She will hole up somewhere to tend the wound. Should have shot to kill, and miss out on the sport. Where is the fun in that? The speaker, a tall man with a scar across his face, laughed unpleasantly. Besides, the bounty is the same dead or alive. Might as well have some fun first. Kade felt Grukara tense beside him, felt the rage radiating from her like heat. He placed a hand on her arm, a silent plea for stillness, for patience. They were outnumbered and outflanked. Running would be suicide. Fighting would be little better. Their only chance was to remain hidden and pray the hunters moved on. For long, agonizing minutes, the mercenaries searched the area, poking through bushes and checking behind trees. They came within 10 feet of where Kade and Grukara hid, close enough that Kade could see the mud on their boots and count the notches on their sword hilts. His arrow was trained on the nearest man's chest, his fingers steady on the bowstring despite the fear clawing at his throat. If they were discovered, he would kill that one first, then the one with the crossbow. It would not save them, but it might give Grukara a chance to escape. But the hunters did not find them. After what felt like an eternity, the scarred leader cursed and gestured to the others. Spread out. She has to be around here somewhere, and watch for tracks. These damned orcs are clever when they want to be. The men dispersed, moving in different directions, their voices fading into the forest. Kade waited until he could no longer hear them at all before lowering his bow and turning to Grukara. Let me see your shoulder. She shook her head, still tense and ready to bolt. We need to move. They will come back. You are bleeding. If you leave a trail, they will follow it straight to wherever you go. Let me see the wound. For a moment he thought she would argue, but then the adrenaline seemed to drain out of her all at once, leaving her sagging with exhaustion and pain. She nodded and let him carefully peel back the torn fabric of her tunic to examine the injury. The crossbow bolt had grazed her, tearing a furrow across the top of her shoulder but not lodging in the muscle. It was painful and bleeding freely, but not life-threatening if it was cleaned and bandaged properly. Kade pulled his pack around and drew out the medical supplies he always carried for hunting accidents, working quickly to clean the wound with water from his canteen and bind it with strips of cloth. Grukara watched him work, her amber eyes unreadable. You should go, she said quietly. This is not your fight. If they find you helping me, you will be marked as a traitor to your own kind. I do not care. You should care. You have a life in Millbrook, people who depend on you. You would throw all of that away for me. Kade tied off the bandage and met her eyes, letting her see the truth in his. Yes. The single word hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than any elaborate declaration could have. Grukara's breath caught, her eyes widening with something that looked almost like fear. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that?" "Because I love you." The words were right there, pressing against his lips, demanding to be spoken. But before he could find the courage, a shout echoed through the forest. The hunters had found their trail. "Come on," Kade said, grabbing her hand and pulling her to her feet. "We need to move. Now." They ran. Kade led her through the forest along paths he had known since childhood, places where the undergrowth was thickest and the tracks would be hardest to follow. He used every trick old Thomas had ever taught him, crossing streams to break the scent trail, doubling back to confuse their direction, climbing through rocky areas that would not hold prints. Grukara followed without question, trusting him completely, and that trust felt more precious than anything he had ever held. The hunters were persistent, though, their shouts and crashes through the underbrush never quite fading away. They were spreading out, cutting off avenues of escape, driving their quarry toward a corner. Kade's mind raced as he ran, calculating distances and terrain, trying to figure out how to get Grukara to safety. Then it hit him. The limestone caves to the north, where the direwolf pack had denned. The entrance was narrow and easy to defend, and the caverns went deep, with multiple chambers and passages. If they could reach it, they could lose the hunters in the darkness, maybe even circle back and escape while the mercenaries were still searching. "This way," he gasped, changing direction toward the north. "I know a place. We can lose them there." They ran until Kade's lungs burned and his legs felt like water, but finally, blessedly, the dark mouth of the cave appeared through the trees. He pulled Grukara inside just as another shout echoed from far too close behind them. In the sudden darkness, he could hear her ragged breathing, could feel her body shaking with exhaustion or fear or both. "Stay here," he whispered. "Let your eyes adjust. The cave goes deep, and there are side passages. We can hide in one of them." But even as he spoke, he heard the hunters emerging into the clearing outside, heard their triumphant shouts as they spotted the cave entrance. They were trapped. Kade's mind worked frantically, trying to think of a way out. The cave had another entrance deeper in, a narrow cleft that opened onto a cliff face. It would be a treacherous climb, especially in the dark, but it was their only chance. He turned to tell Grukara, then froze at the look on her face. She was staring at the cave mouth, where the silhouettes of the hunters were gathering, and her expression was not one of fear. It was resolve, hard and cold and terrible. She looked like a warrior, like the daughter her mother had wanted her to be, and Kade's blood turned to ice. "No," he said, grabbing her arm. "Whatever you are thinking, no. They will come in here," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "They will find us and they will kill us both, unless someone stops them. There are 4 of them, Grukara. You are wounded and exhausted. It would be suicide." "Perhaps." She looked at him, and there was something ancient and sad in her amber eyes, something that spoke of acceptance and goodbye. "But they will not get past me to reach you. That much I can promise." "Damn it, no," Kade's voice cracked with desperation. "I will not let you throw your life away. We can escape through the back. There is another way out. Please, Grukara, please trust me." She studied him for a long moment, and he could see the war playing out behind her eyes, the old instinct to fight warring with something newer, something he had helped plant there. Hope, maybe, or trust, or the belief that maybe, just maybe, she did not have to face everything alone. "Show me," she said finally. Relief flooded through him so intense it was almost painful. He took her hand again and led her deeper into the cave. navigating by memory and the faint light filtering in from cracks in the stone above. Behind them, he could hear the hunters entering the cave, their voices echoing strangely in the confined space. "Where is she? Damned orc cannot just disappear. Check the side passages, and watch for ambush. These caves are perfect for it." Kade moved as quickly as he dared, pulling Grukara along passages that twisted and turned, ascending gradually toward the cliff exit. His heart hammered in his chest, fear making his hands shake, but he kept moving, kept pushing forward. They were so close, just a little further. They emerged onto the cliff face as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The drop below was dizzying, a good 50 feet to the rocky ground below, but there was a path, a narrow ledge that wound its way down the rock face. It would be dangerous in full daylight. In the gathering dusk, it would be deadly, but the shouts from inside the cave were getting closer and there was no other choice. "Can you climb?" Kade asked, already knowing the answer. Grukara was orc strong, far more powerful than any human. If anyone could make this climb, it was her. "I can climb," she confirmed, then looked at him with concern. "Can you? I will manage." He hoped that was true. He had climbed cliffs before, but never anything this high, never anything this exposed, and never with his hands shaking from adrenaline and fear. Grukara went first, moving with careful deliberation despite her wounded shoulder, testing each handhold before committing her weight to it. Kade followed, his breath coming in short gasps, his entire focus narrowed to the next grip, the next foothold, the next inch of progress down the cliff face. Do not look down. Do not think about falling. Just keep moving. They were halfway down when one of the hunters emerged onto the cliff top. Kade heard the man's triumphant shout, heard the ominous click of a crossbow being cocked, and knew they were out of time. "Drop," he yelled. Grukara did not hesitate, releasing her grip and falling the remaining 20 feet to land in a crouch on the rocky ground below. The impact drove her to her knees, but she rolled with it, coming up in a ready stance and looking up at him with fear in her eyes. Kade did not have time to prepare, did not have time to think. He heard the crossbow loose and felt the bolt sizzle through the air where his head had been a second before. And then he was falling, wind rushing past him, the ground rushing up to meet him. He hit hard, something in his ankle giving way with a sickening crunch, and then pain exploded through his entire leg. He tried to cry out, but the impact had driven the air from his lungs, leaving him gasping and writhing on the ground like a landed fish. Hands grabbed him, strong and sure, and then Grukara was hauling him up, slinging his arm over her shoulders and half carrying, half dragging him away from the cliff as more bolts rained down from above. Kade tried to help, tried to put weight on his injured leg, but each attempt sent white-hot agony shooting up his spine. "Leave me," he gasped. "You can move faster without me." "Shut up," Grukara snarled, and there was so much fierce protectiveness in her voice that it cut through even the pain. "I am not leaving you. Do not ever ask me to do that again." She carried him into the forest as the sun finished setting, moving through the darkness with that uncanny grace of hers, never stumbling, never slowing despite his weight. Behind them, he could hear the hunters scrambling down the cliff or searching for another way around, but their voices grew fainter as Grukara put distance between them and their pursuers. Finally, when full darkness had fallen and she was satisfied they were not being followed, Grukara lowered Kade to the ground in a small hollow protected by overhanging rocks. She was breathing hard, her shoulder bleeding again from the exertion, but her focus was entirely on him. "Let me see your leg," she commanded. Kade bit back a groan as she carefully removed his boot and examined his ankle. Even in the dim moonlight, he could see it was badly swollen, probably broken. Grukara cursed in her own language, a fluid string of words that somehow sounded musical despite their obvious vulgarity. "I am going to splint this," she said. "It will hurt. I know." She worked with the same efficiency he had used on her shoulder, gathering straight branches and tearing strips from her own tunic to bind his ankle immobile. Every movement was agony, but Kade gritted his teeth and bore it, refusing to cry out even when the pain brought tears to his eyes. When she finished, she sat back on her heels and looked at him with an expression of profound guilt. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "You are hurt because of me. Those hunters were after me, and you got caught in the middle." "I chose to help you," Kade said through gritted teeth. "That was my decision, not yours. A foolish decision, maybe, but I do not regret it." Grukara shook her head, frustration and something else playing across her face. "You should. You should regret ever meeting me. I have brought you nothing but danger. Your life would be simpler, safer, better if I had never existed." "My life would be emptier," Kade said quietly. The pain was making him reckless, stripping away his careful filters. "You are the best thing that has happened to me, Grukara. These past months, getting to know you, spending time with you, they have been the happiest of my life. So no, I do not regret meeting you. I could never regret that." She stared at him, her amber eyes wide and shimmering with unshed tears. "Kade." "I know it is impossible," he continued, the words spilling out now that he had started, unable to be stopped. "I know there is no future for us, no way this ends that does not break both our hearts. But I need you to know, need you to understand that I do not regret a single moment. Being your friend has been an honor. Knowing you has made me a better person. And if I die out here in these woods because I chose to help you, then I die happy, because I spent my last day with the most remarkable person I have ever met." A single tear traced its way down Grukara's cheek, catching the moonlight as it fell. "You foolish, wonderful, impossible man," she whispered. Then she leaned forward and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce and desperate, full of all the longing and denial and fear they had both been carrying for months. Kade's hands came up to cup her face, pulling her closer despite the pain in his leg, pouring everything he felt into that kiss because words would never be enough. She tasted like wild things and wood smoke and salt from her tears, and it was perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grukara rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she said simply. "I have loved you for months, and I have been too afraid to say it. Too afraid of what it would mean, what it would cost us both. But you almost died today, and I realized that not telling you would be the greater cowardice." "I love you too," Kade said, his voice rough with emotion. "So much it terrifies me." They held each other in that hidden hollow as the night deepened around them. Two people who should never have met, should never have cared for each other, clinging together against a world that wanted them apart. Kade's leg throbbed with pain. His body ached with exhaustion, and mercenaries were hunting them through the forest. But in that moment, he had never felt more complete. Eventually, practical concerns reasserted themselves. They could not stay here. The hunters would continue searching at first light, and Kade's injury meant they could not move quickly. They needed shelter, supplies, and time for his ankle to heal. They needed a plan. "We could go to the village," Kade suggested. "There are people there who would help us, who would stand with us against the hunters." Grukara shook her head. "You know that is not true. The moment they see me, they will side with the hunters. I am an orc. You are human. No matter what you say, they will assume I forced you to help me, that you are a victim, not a willing participant. Then we run. We head west into the deep wilderness. We can build a life there, somewhere no one will find us. You would leave everything. Your home, your people, the life you have built. She pulled back to look at him, searching his face. "That is not a small thing, Kade. That is everything. You are everything," he said simply. "The rest is just details." The wonder in her eyes at those words was worth any sacrifice. But she was still shaking her head, practical even in the face of his declaration. "You have a broken ankle. We have no supplies, no food beyond what we can forage. Winter will come in a few months, and we cannot survive the mountain winters without shelter and provisions. Be realistic, Kade. What you are suggesting is impossible." She was right, and he knew it. The romantic in him wanted to insist they could overcome anything together, that love would be enough. But the hunter in him, the practical part shaped by years in the wilderness, knew that love did not fix broken bones or create food from nothing or protect against the brutal cold of winter in the high country. "There might be another way," he said slowly, an idea forming. "Not the village, but there is a homestead about half a day's journey west, an old couple, Thomas and Martha. Thomas taught me to hunt. They have no love for the village council, and they value actions over prejudice. If anyone would give us shelter while we figure out what comes next, it would be them." Grukara considered this, her expression skeptical. "You think they would harbor an orc, risk the wrath of the hunters and the village?" "I think they would help someone in need, and I think they trust my judgment. It is a risk, but it is better than any other option we have." She was quiet for a long moment, weighing the danger against their limited choices. Finally, she nodded. "Then we go to them. But if they turn us away, we run, and we do not stop running." "Agreed." "Agreed." They waited until the darkest part of the night, when even the most dedicated hunters would be sleeping, before starting to move. Grukara fashioned a crude crutch from a forked branch, and Kade leaned heavily on it as they made their way slowly westward through the forest. Every step was agony, jarring his broken ankle despite the splint, but he set his teeth and kept moving. They had no choice. Stopping meant capture or death. The journey that should have taken hours stretched into half the night and beyond. Grukara was endlessly patient, matching her pace to his, stopping when he needed to rest despite the danger of delay. She kept alert for any signs of pursuit, her keen senses attuned to the forest around them, ready to fight or flee at the first sign of threat. Dawn was breaking when they finally stumbled out of the trees and saw the homestead ahead, a sturdy log cabin with smoke rising from the chimney, surrounded by neat fields and a small barn. Dogs began barking at their approach, and within moments, Thomas appeared in the doorway, a hunting rifle in his weathered hands. He was a lean, grizzled man in his 60s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes widened when he saw Kade limping toward him, supported by Grukara, took in the blood and exhaustion and desperation written across both their faces. The rifle did not quite lower, but it did not raise either. "Kade." Thomas's voice was rough with surprise and concern. "What in the name of the gods happened to you, mercenaries?" Kade gasped, reaching the end of his endurance. His vision was starting to tunnel from pain and exhaustion. "Hunting her, we need help. Please, Thomas. I know how this looks, but please. She saved my life." Thomas looked from Kade to Grukara and back again, clearly trying to reconcile what he was seeing with a lifetime of prejudice and fear. Martha appeared behind him, a small woman with kind eyes and capable hands, and her gasp was audible when she saw the state they were in. "They are hurt," she said firmly, pushing past her husband. "Whatever else is happening, they are hurt. Bring them inside." "Martha, that is an orc. That is a woman, and she is bleeding, and this boy who you trained is half dead on his feet. We can sort out the rest after we have tended their wounds. Now help me." The authority in her voice broke through Thomas's hesitation. He lowered the rifle and hurried forward, taking Kade's other arm and helping Grukara carry him into the cabin. They laid him on a sturdy bed in the main room, and Martha immediately went to work examining his ankle while Thomas fetched water and bandages. Grukara stood to the side, tense and ready to bolt, watching the old couple with wary eyes. Kade reached out a hand to her. "It is all right," he said, though he was not entirely sure that was true. "They will help us." She took his hand, and that simple gesture told the old couple more than any explanation could have. Thomas and Martha exchanged a long look, a silent conversation in the way of people who had been married for decades, and something softened in both their expressions. "All right then," Martha said briskly, turning her attention to Grukara. "Let me see that shoulder, girl, and do not argue. I have been stitching up my fool husband's hunting accidents for 40 years. I know what I am doing." For a moment, Kade thought Grukara would refuse. But then, perhaps recognizing that they were at the end of their options, she nodded and allowed Martha to examine her wound. The old woman cleaned and rebandaged the crossbow graze with practiced efficiency, muttering about foolish hunters who shot first and asked questions never. Thomas, meanwhile, was splinting Kade's ankle properly, his touch gentle despite the pain it caused. "This is going to need weeks to heal," he said quietly. "You are not walking on this anytime soon, boy. You know that, right?" "I know." "So you are going to be here for a while, which means we need to know the whole story. And I mean the whole story, Kade. Not whatever version you think will sound best. The truth." So Kade told them. He told them about meeting Grukara in the forest, about the months of friendship that had grown into something deeper, about the hunters and the flight and the jump from the cliff. He told them about the mercenaries still out there, still searching, and the danger that hosting them both would bring to this homestead. He told them everything, holding nothing back, because Thomas deserved the truth, and because he was too exhausted to lie even if he had wanted to. When he finished, silence filled the cabin. Thomas and Martha looked at each other again, another of those wordless conversations. Finally, Thomas sighed and ran a hand through his gray hair. "You always were a stubborn, soft-hearted fool," he said, but there was no anger in it, only a sort of exasperated affection. "Takes after me, I suppose. Martha has been telling me for years that I collect strays." "She is not a stray," Kade said fiercely, despite his exhaustion. "She is brilliant and kind and brave, and she deserves better than to be hunted like an animal." "Easy, boy. I am not arguing with you." Thomas held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I am just saying that I understand. I see how you look at her, and I see how she looks at you. Damned if I understand how this happened or where it can possibly go, but I know what love looks like. Heaven knows I have been living it for 40 years. Martha smiled at her husband, then turned to Grukara. "You are welcome to stay here while the boy heals. We cannot promise it will be safe. Those hunters might come searching, but you have a place at our table for as long as you need it." Grukara's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked utterly lost, as if she could not quite believe what she was hearing. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you help me?" "Because you saved that fool boy's life," Martha said simply. "Because you are hurt and scared and in need of kindness, and because it is the right thing to do. Now, that is all the philosophy I have time for this morning. You both look like you are about to fall over. Kade, you stay in that bed. Grukara, there is a pallet in the back room you can use. Get some rest. We will stand watch and wake you if there is any sign of trouble." It was not until later, after he had woken from a long, dreamless sleep to find afternoon sun streaming through the windows, that Kade realized what a gift Thomas and Martha had given them. Not just shelter, though that was precious enough. They had given them acceptance. They had looked at an orc and a human in love and offered help instead of judgment. In a world that seemed determined to tear them apart, that was more valuable than gold. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that was almost peaceful. Kade's ankle healed slowly, the bone knitting back together in stages that felt impossibly gradual to someone used to being active and mobile. He chafed at the confinement, at his helplessness, but Grukara was there, reading to him from Thomas's small collection of books, talking with him for hours, playing simple games of dice or cards to pass the time. Grukara, for her part, threw herself into being useful to their hosts. She helped Martha in the garden, her knowledge of plants proving invaluable. She repaired parts of the barn that Thomas's aging body could no longer manage, her orc strength making short work of heavy timbers and stubborn nails. She cooked meals that had Martha begging for recipes, and she carved small wooden figurines that Thomas proudly displayed on the mantel. The old couple treated her not as a monster or a curiosity, but simply as a person, and the transformation in Grukara was remarkable. The wariness that had been her constant companion began to fade. She smiled more easily, laughed more freely. The walls she had built around herself for protection began to come down, and the woman underneath was radiant. Kade fell more in love with her every day, watching her bloom in this environment of acceptance. They stole moments together when they could, quiet conversations in the garden or gentle kisses when no one was watching. It was not the grand romance of stories, but it felt real and precious and worth fighting for. The hunters came twice, following rumors and tracks, searching the area for their escaped prey. Both times, Thomas met them at the property line with his rifle and a hard stare, insisting he had seen nothing and inviting them to search his land if they had a warrant. The hunters, faced with an armed homesteader who knew his rights, grumbled and moved on without forcing the issue. But it was a reminder that the danger had not passed, that they were living on borrowed time. "We cannot stay here forever," Grukara said one evening as she and Kade sat on the porch watching the sunset. His ankle was mostly healed now, weight-bearing with only a slight limp. Soon he would have no excuse to remain a burden on Thomas and Martha's hospitality. "I know," Kade said. "We need to make a choice. Stay and risk bringing more trouble to Thomas and Martha, or leave and try to build a life somewhere else. Where would we go? Every human settlement will see me as a threat. My own people cast me out years ago. There is nowhere we belong. Then we make our own place." The idea had been forming in Kade's mind for days, taking shape slowly like a sculpture emerging from rough wood. The frontier is vast. There are places where no one goes, valleys and forests unclaimed by human or orc. We could build a homestead, far from anyone who would judge or threaten us. We could make a life there, just the two of us. Grukara looked at him with an expression that was equal parts hope and fear. "That is a hard life, Kade, dangerous and lonely. No neighbors to help if things go wrong. No community to fall back on, just us against the wilderness." "I have been against the wilderness my whole life," Kade said, taking her hand. "It is where I feel most at home. And I will never be lonely as long as I have you. You make it sound simple. It will not be simple. It will be the hardest thing either of us has ever done, but I believe we can do it. Together." She turned to look at him fully, her amber eyes searching his face. "You would really do this? Give up everything, your home, your people, any chance of a normal life to be with me?" "I would. I will. If you will have me." For a long moment she did not answer, and Kade's heart hammered in his chest, afraid he had pushed too far, asked too much. But then Grukara smiled, a slow, beautiful smile that lit up her entire face. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will have you, Kade Finnegan. today and every day after for as long as we both live. Yes. Kade pulled her close and kissed her, pouring all his joy and relief and love into the embrace. When they broke apart, both were smiling like fools, giddy with the enormity of what they had just decided. That night, they told Thomas and Martha their plan. The old couple listened quietly, exchanging those wordless looks that spoke of a conversation beyond words. When Kade finished explaining, Thomas nodded slowly. "It is a good plan," he said. "Risky, but good. And I think you two have a better chance than most of making it work. You are both tough, both skilled, and you clearly love each other enough to see it through." "We will help you prepare," Martha added. "Supplies, tools, seeds for planting. We have more than we need, and it would be an honor to give you a start." "We cannot take your things," Grukara protested. "You have already done so much for us." "Consider it a wedding gift," Martha said with a sly smile. "You are getting married, are you not? I may be old, but I am not blind. The way you two look at each other, it is only a matter of time." Kade and Grukara looked at each other, both surprised and pleased by the assumption. "We had not discussed it formally," Kade admitted. "But yes, if she will have me, I would very much like to marry her." "I will have you," Grukara said, her voice thick with emotion. "In whatever way is possible, whatever ceremony we can cobble together, I will have you." So 3 days later, in the small cabin with only Thomas and Martha as witnesses, they were married. It was not a legal ceremony, recognized by no church or state, but it was real to them. Thomas spoke words about love and commitment and facing the future together. Martha wove flowers from her garden into Grukara's hair. Kade and Grukara spoke their own vows, simple promises to stand by each other through whatever came, to build a life together in the wild places where they could be free. When Thomas pronounced them married, Kade kissed his wife for the first time, and the pure joy of that moment was something he knew he would carry with him for the rest of his life. They spent another week preparing for the journey, gathering supplies and making plans. Thomas sketched out maps of the far frontier, marking the places he had explored in his younger days as a hunter and trapper. There was a valley, he said, 3 weeks' journey west and north, protected by mountains on 3 sides and watered by a clear stream. He had been there once, decades ago, and thought it perfect for a homestead. Remote enough to be safe, fertile enough to sustain life, and far from any settlements or territories claimed by clan or country. Martha packed food that would last for weeks if rationed carefully, along with seeds for planting and cuttings from her garden. Thomas contributed tools, an axe and saw, knives and rope, and his old hunting bow with a quiver of arrows. They gave everything they could spare, and some things they probably could not, and their generosity moved both Kade and Grukara to tears. On the morning they were to leave, Martha hugged Grukara tightly, whispering something in her ear that made the orc woman's eyes glisten with tears. Thomas gripped Kade's shoulder in a gesture that conveyed everything words could not, pride and affection and hope all mixed together. "You take care of each other," Thomas said gruffly. "And if you ever need anything, you know where to find us." "Thank you," Kade said, his voice rough. "For everything. We will never forget what you have done for us." "Just live well," Martha said. "Live well and be happy. That is all the thanks we need." They left as the sun was rising, walking west into the frontier, into the unknown. Kade's ankle twinged with each step, but it held, and his pace was steady. Grukara walked beside him, her hand in his, her face turned toward the future with an expression of cautious hope. The journey was long and arduous. They crossed rivers swollen with summer melt, climbed through mountain passes that tested their endurance, slept under the stars or in crude shelters built from branches and hides. They hunted and foraged, using every bit of knowledge they possessed to survive. There were moments of fear when they heard other travelers in the distance and had to hide until the danger passed. There were moments of doubt when the path seemed impossible and the dream too distant. But there were also moments of pure joy, lying together under a sky full of stars, cooking fresh fish over a campfire, discovering a meadow full of wildflowers that took their breath away. And through it all, they had each other. When Kade's ankle ached too much to continue, Grukara would carry their packs and scout ahead for an easier path. When Grukara woke from nightmares of being hunted, Kade would hold her and whisper assurances until she calmed. They learned each other in new ways during those weeks, the partnership of survival deepening the bond between them. Finally, nearly a month after leaving Thomas and Martha's homestead, they crested a ridge and saw the valley spread out below them, exactly as Thomas had described. It was breathtaking, a wide bowl of green rimmed by protective mountains, with a stream cutting through the center that sparkled in the afternoon light. There were stands of timber for building, meadows for planting or grazing, and the bones of an old structure near the stream, perhaps a trapper's cabin from years past that could be rebuilt. "This is it," Kade said, awe in his voice. "This is home." Grukara stood beside him, her eyes scanning the valley with the careful assessment of someone who had learned not to trust beauty at face value. But slowly, gradually, he saw her shoulders relax, saw hope bloom across her face. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, this could be home." They descended into the valley as the sun was setting, and that night they slept under the stars in their new home, wrapped in each other's arms, exhausted and happy and free. The work of building a life in the wilderness was every bit as hard as they had known it would be. They spent their days felling trees and stripping logs, slowly rebuilding the old cabin into something sturdy enough to withstand winter. Grukara's strength was invaluable, allowing her to move timber that would have taken Kade hours with levers and pulleys. Kade's knowledge of carpentry and construction, learned from helping rebuild homes after storms in Millbrook, ensured that what they built would last. They cleared land for a garden, Grukara's expertise with plants guiding their choices of what to grow and where. They hunted and smoked meat to build up stores for winter. They explored every corner of their valley, learning its rhythms and secrets, finding the best fishing spots and the paths the deer used and the places where berries grew thick. It was exhausting work that left them both sore and tired at the end of each day. But it was their work, building their future with their own hands, and there was a satisfaction in that which neither had ever felt before. At night, they would sit by the fire in their slowly growing home, Grukara carving while Kade mended gear or fletched new arrows, and talk about their plans. A chicken coop for spring, perhaps, if they could trade for birds in one of the distant settlements. A second room for the cabin, for when they might need more space. A small forge if they could gather enough iron, so Grukara could craft the tools they would need. "Children?" Grukara asked one night, the question hesitant as if she feared the answer. Kade looked up from the bowstring he was waxing, surprised. "Do you want children?" "I do not know if it is even possible," she said, not meeting his eyes, her hand still on the piece of wood she was shaping. "Between human and orc, I mean. I have heard stories, rumors, but nothing certain. And even if it is possible, I do not know if it would be fair. To bring a child into a world that would see them as an abomination, neither one thing nor the other." Kade set aside his work and moved to sit beside her, taking one of her hands in his. "If we are blessed with children, we will love them and protect them and teach them to be proud of who they are. And they will not be alone because they will have us. That is all any child really needs, is it not? To be loved and wanted." Grukara's eyes shimmered with tears. "You always know exactly what to say. I just say what is true." He leaned in to kiss her softly. "Whatever comes, we face it together. That is what we promised." Summer faded into autumn, and their cabin took real shape, a solid structure with a proper roof and a door that closed against the wind. They cut and stacked wood for winter, more than they thought they could possibly need, because Thomas had warned them that mountain winters were brutal, and it was better to have too much than too little. They preserved everything they could, drying berries and smoking meat and storing root vegetables in the small cellar they had dug beneath the cabin. As the first snows began to fall, dusting the mountains with white, they sealed themselves into their small home and faced their first winter together. It was long and cold and isolating, the outside world reduced to a white expanse that sometimes felt like a wall cutting them off from everything. But inside, by the fire, they had each other. They told stories and played games and made love slowly, luxuriously, with all the time in the world. They planned for spring and dreamed of the future, and simply existed together in a way that felt like the greatest gift either had ever received. One night, deep in winter when the snow was piled high against the cabin walls, Grukara woke Kade with tears streaming down her face. For a moment he thought it was another nightmare, but when she spoke, her voice was full of wonder rather than fear. "I can feel it," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her belly. "There is life, Kade, our child, growing inside me." Kade's heart seemed to stop and then restart at double speed. "Are you certain?" "I am certain. I know my own body, and this is new. This is different." "We made a life, you and I." She laughed, a joyful sound that filled the small cabin. "We made a life." They held each other in the darkness, marveling at the impossible miracle growing between them. A child, half human and half orc, born of love in defiance of a world that said such things should not be. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Spring came slowly, the snow melting in gradual stages to reveal the valley in all its renewed glory. Grukara's belly grew rounder as the world grew greener, life blooming inside and outside in tandem. Kade fussed over her constantly, worried about her health, about the baby, about 1,000 things that could go wrong. But Grukara was strong, growing stronger as the pregnancy progressed, as if the life inside her filled her with renewed vitality. They planted their garden as the last of the snow melted, working together to turn the soil and place the seeds. They fished in the stream and hunted in the forests and built a crib from carefully selected wood that Grukara carved with intricate patterns of leaves and animals. And when the summer sun was at its height, when the valley was lush and green and alive, their daughter was born. It was a long labor that tested Grukara's strength and Kade's ability to remain calm, but when he finally held the tiny, squalling infant in his arms, everything else fell away. She had Grukara's green skin, lighter than her mother's, and tiny, barely visible tusks. She had Kade's eyes, that same dark brown that looked almost black in certain lights. She was perfect. "What should we name her?" Kade asked, cradling their daughter with a gentleness he had not known he possessed. Grukara, exhausted but radiant, smiled. "Kira. It means new beginning in my language. Does that suit her?" "Kira," Kade repeated, testing the name. "Yes, that suits her perfectly." Life settled into new rhythms with Kira's arrival. Days were structured around her needs, the feeding and changing and constant watchfulness that infants required. Nights were broken by her cries, though Kade found he did not mind the exhaustion as much as he might have expected. Every moment with his daughter felt precious, from her first smiles to the way she grasped his finger with her tiny hand to the soft cooing sounds she made when content. Grukara was a fierce and loving mother, protective in the way only someone who had never known protection could be. She sang to Kira in her native language, old songs that spoke of mountains and stars and the great rhythm of the seasons. She carved toys and told stories and watched over their daughter with eyes that rarely left her for long. Kade hunted and tended the garden and maintained their home, taking on more of the physical work as Grukara recovered from the birth, and then devoted herself to their child. He found himself marveling at the strange, perfect life they had built. A year ago, he had been a hunter in Millbrook, living alone, following a path that seemed predetermined. Now he was a husband, a father, a homesteader in a hidden valley, building a life so different from anything he had imagined that it felt like a dream. But it was not a dream. It was real as Grukara's hand in his when they sat together watching Kira sleep, as real as the calluses on his palms from swinging an axe, as real as the fierce love that filled his chest every time he looked at his family. The seasons turned again, and Kira grew, learning to crawl and then toddle and then run through the meadow on unsteady legs while her parents watched with proud smiles. She was bright and curious, asking endless questions about everything she saw, equally at home in her father's language and her mother's. She knew nothing of the prejudice and hatred that divided the world beyond their valley. To her, the differences between her parents were just interesting variations, like how Papa was better at fishing but Mama could carry heavier loads, how Papa told different stories than Mama, but both were wonderful in their own way. One day, when Kira was 3 years old and the valley was in full summer bloom, Grukara turned to Kade with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up your old life for this one?" Kade looked around at the cabin they had built, at the garden flourishing under Grukara's care, at their daughter gathering flowers in the meadow with intense concentration. He thought about Millbrook, about the life he had left behind, the people and places he would probably never see again. He thought about Thomas and Martha, the only people from his old life who knew where he was, and wondered how they were doing. But then he looked at Grukara, at the woman he loved more than breath itself, at the life they had created together against all odds, and the answer was easy. "Not for a moment," he said. "This life with you, with Kira in this place we built with our own hands, this is everything I ever wanted and more. I have never been happier." Grukara smiled, that radiant expression that never failed to make his heart skip. "Neither have I," she said softly. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I truly belong somewhere. With you, with our family. I never thought I would know this feeling, this sense of home." "You deserve it," Kade said fiercely. "You deserve every bit of happiness in the world. So do you." She leaned in to kiss him, a gentle press of lips that still sent warmth flooding through him even after years together. "Thank you, Kade Finnegan, for seeing past what I am to who I am, for choosing me when it would have been easier to walk away, for building this life with me." "Thank you for letting me," Kade replied. "For trusting me when you had every reason not to, for being brave enough to hope for something better, for being exactly who you are." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their daughter play, and Kade felt a deep, abiding contentment settle over him. This was what he had been searching for all his life without knowing it. Not grand adventures or glory or recognition, but this simple, profound peace. A home. A family. Love. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain in its specifics but certain in one crucial way. They would face it together, whatever came. And that, Kade knew, was enough. It was everything. Years passed in their hidden valley, marked by the cycles of seasons and the growth of their daughter. Kira learned to hunt with her father, developing a keen eye and steady hand that made Kade proud. She learned to garden and forage with her mother, absorbing Grukara's vast knowledge of plants and their uses. She was strong like her mother, quick like her father, and blessed with a fierce intelligence that sometimes surprised them both. Other children followed Kira, two sons who inherited different combinations of their parents' features, creating a family that was uniquely their own. The cabin expanded to accommodate them, rooms added on as needed, the structure growing organically like a living thing. The garden grew too, more land cleared and cultivated, providing more than enough to feed their growing family. They remained isolated by choice and by necessity. Occasionally, they would make the long journey to one of the distant frontier settlements to trade furs and carved goods for the few things they could not make themselves: iron and salt and fabric. These trips were tense, with Grukara disguised as much as possible, and the children coached to stay quiet and close. But the settlements were rough places on the very edge of civilization, populated by people who asked few questions and cared little about the business of others as long as trade was fair. They never stayed long, never revealed where they came from, and never let down their guard. Once, on one of these trading journeys, they saw a posted notice offering a reward for information about an orc woman and a human man seen traveling together years before. The description was vague, the reward paltry, and it was clear the hunters had long since moved on to other pursuits. But it was a reminder that the world had not changed, that the prejudices and fears that had driven them to isolation still festered in the hearts of men. "You think it will ever be different?" Kira asked one night when she was 15, old enough to understand the complexities of the world, old enough to feel the weight of her heritage. "Do you think humans and orcs will ever be able to live together in peace?" Kade and Grukara exchanged a look, the wordless communication they had perfected over years together. "Maybe someday," Kade said finally. "Change happens slowly, generation by generation. People like you, Kira, who embody both worlds, you might be part of that change. But it will not be easy and it will not be fast." "Then why not try to help it happen?" Kira pressed. "Why hide here when we could be out there, showing people that it is possible?" "Because the cost of being wrong is your life," Grukara said bluntly. "Because there are people who would kill you simply for existing, for being living proof that the boundaries they hold sacred can be crossed. We hide here not out of cowardice but out of necessity, to keep you safe, to keep this family intact. But is safety worth living in isolation?" Kira challenged, the idealism of youth shining in her eyes. "Do we not have a responsibility to try to make things better?" It was an old argument, one they had variations of regularly as Kira grew older and more aware of the larger world. Kade understood his daughter's frustration, the chafing against limitations not of her making. But he also understood the very real dangers that lurked beyond their valley, the hatred and violence that would greet her mixed heritage in most places. "You will have to make that choice for yourself someday," he said finally. "When you are grown, when this valley feels too small, you will have to decide what path to take. Your mother and I cannot make that choice for you. But until then, while you are still our responsibility, we will choose safety. We will choose life, even if it means isolation." Kira was not entirely satisfied with that answer, but she accepted it, as she had learned to accept the other realities of their unique existence. And in truth, despite her occasional frustrations, she thrived in the valley. She had her family, her freedom, and the wild beauty of the mountains as her playground. It was a good life, better than many, even if it was not perfect. When Kira was 18, Thomas and Martha made the long journey to visit them, having finally decided they were too old to continue managing their homestead alone and wanting to spend their final years with the closest thing they had to family. The reunion was joyful and tearful, the old couple marveling at the life Kade and Grukara had built at the thriving children and flourishing homestead. "You did well," Thomas said to Kade as they sat together one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Better than I ever imagined when you first brought that scared orc woman to my door. You built something real, something lasting. You should be proud." "I am," Kade said, "though I could not have done it without Grukara. She is the strong one, the truly brave one." "I just loved her and tried to be worthy of her," Thomas chuckled. "That is what all good men say about their wives. Martha could probably say the same about me. The secret to a long marriage is not some grand romantic gesture. It is showing up every day and choosing each other over and over, even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. You two have done that and you will continue to do it. That is what matters." "Thank you," Kade said, his throat tight with emotion. "For everything. For giving us a chance when no one else would. For the supplies and the maps and the hope. We would not be here without you." "You would have found a way," Thomas said with certainty. "People who love each other as much as you two do always find a way. We just made it a little easier." The old couple settled into life in the valley, taking on the lighter tasks and spending their days playing with their adopted grandchildren and sharing stories of their long lives. Martha taught Kira and her brothers to weave and sew, passing on skills that enriched the family's capabilities. Thomas shared a lifetime of accumulated wisdom about hunting and tracking and reading the land. Their presence filled the valley with a new warmth, the sense of multiple generations bound together by love rather than blood alone. When Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years later, they buried him on a hill overlooking the valley, in a spot where the sunrise painted the world in shades of rose and gold every morning. Martha followed him 6 months later, as if she had only been waiting to ensure everything was settled before joining her husband of 5 decades. They were laid to rest side by side, and Kade carved markers from the same wood Grukara had used for their wedding, inscribing them with words of love and gratitude. "They gave us this life," Grukara said at the graveside, tears streaming down her face. "They looked at us and saw people, not monsters, not a scandal, just people who loved each other. I will never forget that gift." "Neither will I," Kade said, his own eyes wet. "And we will pass it on. To our children, to their children, this lesson that love matters more than fear, that kindness is stronger than hatred. That will be our legacy, theirs and ours together." The years continued their inexorable march, marked by the milestones of family life. Kira left the valley when she was 25, determined to see the world and perhaps, in her own way, to start building bridges between the divided peoples. She promised to return, and she kept that promise, coming back every few years with new stories and a growing family of her own, having found a partner who loved her for exactly who she was. Her brothers chose different paths, one staying in the valley to build his own homestead nearby, the other venturing forth to explore the far frontiers and send occasional letters full of adventure and discovery. Kade and Grukara grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies acquiring the aches and pains of a life spent working the land. But they never lost the love that had brought them together all those decades before. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by time and trial into something unbreakable. They still sat together by the fire on cold evenings, still held hands while walking through the meadow in summer, still looked at each other with the same wonder that they had felt in those first, tentative days of their friendship. One evening, when they were both well into their 60s, Grukara turned to Kade with a soft smile. "Do you remember the day we met, when you almost shot me?" "How could I forget?" Kade laughed. "I thought you were a direwolf, but then I saw your eyes and I knew I could not kill you. That you were something extraordinary. Just a frightened woman gathering mushrooms, Grukara said. Nothing extraordinary about that. Everything extraordinary about you, Kade corrected. Your strength, your kindness, your courage. You were extraordinary then, and you are extraordinary now. You are biased. Absolutely, and I regret nothing. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in the familiar embrace of decades. I love you, Grukara. I have loved you since that day by the creek when we sat together as the sun set. I will love you for whatever time we have left, and I will love you beyond that into whatever comes after. I love you too, she whispered, burying her face in his shoulder. You gave me something I never thought I could have. A home, a family, a place where I belong. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You loved me when I was unlovable. You changed my life. We changed each other's lives, Kade said. That is what love does. It transforms us into better versions of ourselves. It makes the impossible possible. It turns isolation into community, fear into courage, despair into hope. They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, as they had done countless times before, two people who had defied the world to build a life together. The valley spread out around them, their home, their sanctuary, their legacy. Children and grandchildren would carry on after them, spreading across the world, bridges between divided peoples, living proof that love could transcend any boundary. It was a good life they had built, Kade reflected. A life worth living, worth fighting for, worth the sacrifices they had made along the way. And as he held his wife close and looked out at the stars above their valley, he knew with absolute certainty that he would choose this path again in a heartbeat. Every hardship, every danger, every moment of fear and doubt, all of it was worth it for her, for the family they had created and the love that sustained them. The hunter had almost killed the orc woman that day in the misty ravine, his arrow half drawn, his instincts screaming danger. But he had seen her eyes, those warm amber eyes that held such humanity, and he had chosen differently. He had chosen to see her as a person rather than a monster, to offer friendship instead of fear, to build rather than destroy. And that choice, that single moment of hesitation and humanity, had changed everything. It had given both of them a chance at something better, something real. It had created a family, a legacy, a love that would echo down through generations. All because a hunter had looked into an orc woman's eyes and recognized his own reflection staring back. As Kade and Grukara settled into the comfort of old age surrounded by the life they had built together, they knew that their story was not just theirs alone. It was a story of hope, of the possibility that existed when people chose understanding over hatred, when they had the courage to look past differences and see the common humanity underneath. It was a small story, played out in a hidden valley far from the eyes of the world, but it was real and it mattered. And sometimes, the smallest stories are the ones that change everything.